Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Host Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. St. George's University to remain online at the beginning of 2021 until May at least. This story takes the lead in our 988th edition of Caribbean Perspective for Wednesday, 18th November 2020. Details after this important message.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to think safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Welcome back. The Grenada Beast, St. George's University, S.G.U, says it will continue providing classes for its thousands of students online because of the ongoing challenges as a result of the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. Many students, mainly from the United States, are unable to travel to Grenada for the new academic term that is due to begin on January 18th, 2021 and ending May 17th. In a video addressed to students, Chancellor and Chair of the Board of Directors of St. George's University, Charles R. Mardika, says classes would continue via distance learning. Today we announced that St. George's University will continue to provide online distance learning for our students for the entire January 2021 term. Our leadership team considered all aspects of a potential return in January, but remains concerned at the worsening status of COVID-19 pandemic around the world and the related increase in hospitalization, he said. Out of an abundance of caution for our students, faculty, staff, and the people of Grenada and the capacity of the local healthcare system, S.G.U has decided to maintain distance education for the January term, at least, he said, while admitting that the news of the possible vaccine availability by April 2021 is being closely monitored. Thousands of students left Grenada shortly before the island declared a state of emergency and went into lockdown in March as part of measures aimed at controlling and containing the spread of the virus. The university said that while it is working towards getting students back to its True Blue campus as soon and as safely as possible, students in the medicine and the school veterinarian medicine will continue their education exclusively via distance learning, while other students will continue to have limited access to the campus for special classes. All S.G.U employees will continue to have full salaries and benefits. Dozens of property owners have been affected financially by the departure of the students who would normally rent or lease the properties instead of residing on campus. The Caribbean Center for Human Rights expresses concerns over the COVID outbreak at the maximum security prison in Trinidad and Tobago, saying it's unacceptable. The Attorney General has not made good on his promise of the early release of prisoners. Here is TV6's Urvashi Tawari Rupnarayan with the story.
Human rights group the Caribbean Center for Human Rights says the COVID-19 outbreak in prisons is a threat not only to the correctional facilities, but to public health. In a statement issued on Monday, CCHR says it's deeply concerned that over 80 prisoners have tested positive for COVID-19 at the maximum security prison. While it acknowledges government's efforts to mitigate the spread, the organization says the prisons fall short of the World Health Organization's standard practices and recommendations for minimizing COVID risk in a prison setting. It says, quote, sanitization and mask wearing alone will not effectively contain the spread in an overcrowded space. It is impossible to social distance in overcrowded prisons and places not just the prison population at risk, but also the wider community because prisons do not operate in isolation, end quote. The non-profit organization says it is concerned that 7 months after the Attorney General's announcement, the non-violent prisoners with minor offenses would be released to reduce the prison population. Such persons are not yet released. They call it unacceptable and urge the government to do better as a prisoner's constitutional right to health and the right to life ought not to be diminished during their incarceration. The organization deems the prison conditions as ideal for a widespread outbreak of the virus. It says, quote, remand remains a space that is particularly worrying given reports of up to 8 persons being held in one cell, end quote. Prison Commissioner Dennis Pulchan says, according to his count, it's 68 prisoners who have tested positive for COVID-19, and he says there has been no additional cases detected within the past 24 hours. He tells TV6 they are coping well so far. For head of the Prison Officers Association, Sir Ron Richards, the organization's concern is manifest in the daily functionings of the prison system.
There are concerns all around. I mean, prison officers are very concerned. The inmates are very concerned. Everybody in the environment has serious concern because, I mean, COVID-19 is quickly building our reputation throughout the globe.
He calls it an operational nightmare for the prison commissioner, who is constantly separating persons and sanitizing areas. He agrees that prison overcrowding is a pre-existing condition that should have been addressed in the decades gone by.
And what do we do now? The best we can do now is what we are doing. I mean, we cannot build a prison overnight. The minister has been providing spaces outside. In Tobago, he provided two buildings were provided. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have a Claxon Bay facility now that was given to us by the ministry, right? So we have to make best with what we have.
The association president calls for more funding to be available to the commissioner to deal with the health threat and to ensure personal protective equipment is in steady supply. In the meantime, according to his estimates, over 500 prisoners ought to have qualified for release under the non-violent minor crime category, and despite no substantial moves, he says it ought to be acted on immediately.
Of course we should. That should be something on top of the agenda because, I mean, just as the WHO is saying, to fight the COVID-19 virus, you need space. Space is fundamental.
Commissioner Pulchan could offer no update when quizzed about the move to have those prisoners released early. Urvashi Tiwari Rupnarayan, TV6 News.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick.
Over in St. Lucia, the minister with responsibility for tourism, Dominic Fede, is disputing reports that tourists are being allowed to roam around St. Lucia freely. Colby DeVoe of HTS News Force reports.
Minister with responsibility for tourism, Dominic Fede, says some visitors, particularly guests in the yachting sector, may be cleared to mingle with the population after completing the 14-day quarantine period. Video of 2 tourists milling around the Rodney Bay area recently surfaced, prompting questions about visitors' adherence to COVID-19 protocols. In the video, the visitors indicate that they are from Florida and are staying on a boat. Fede attempted to dispel rumors that tourists are permitted to roam free.
And people in the yachting sector would be here for about 14 days. So there's a quarantine experience on the vessels that then when they're finished with that experience, they're then cleared to go into our communities, just as returning nationals who are coming from COVID hotspots. So I want to make that clear as well. A lot of the individuals that are here on yachting experiences are also coming from safe countries that are within the bubble. And that is another consideration as well, which would tremendously reduce the risk of any transfer of the virus from one person to another.
Fede also warned against discrimination based on color or skin tone. He told the public to refrain from assumptions and instead rely on scientific evidence.
We must also be cognizant that there are also a lot of tourist-looking people who live in our country. We are a very diverse country that are of many races, and I think we have to be very careful not to stigmatize any particular race. But what we want to do is to make sure that we do our research and we quantify and qualify the various positions that we will take. I do understand the anxiety, but what we have to do is to allow the science to rule and prevail. And once the science and the professional positions from our various institutions are allowed to be the prevailing view, then I believe that we would do a better job at ensuring that we just don't take blanket or emotional positions.
The minister says the authorities are in dialogue with some resorts on certification. However, accommodation remains the main challenge to lodge both locals and visitors.
We're still talking to some of them. We're not satisfied with where some of the hotels are with their protocols because of their configuration. I mean, one of the issues that come to mind is a property that has a mixed use where there are residents and there are tourists who are staying, and basically it becomes a nightmare for the medical experts to be able to qualify that property because of the prevailing risk of having it exist as a mixed-use property. So what we're doing is not having any shortcuts. We're very tough on the industry at large in ensuring that they have a very stringent compliance to the protocols.
The debate on the source of the increase in COVID-19 cases continues to rage on. Some speculate that persons slipping into the island illegally are to blame, while others contend the upsurge in cases is due to a combination of factors, including lawful entry at legal ports of entry. Colby DeVoe, HDS News Force.
The PPP administration in Guyana must be the most bold-faced and hypocritical political party in the hemisphere, if not the world, says Aubrey Norton in relation to acts by the current PPP government seeking to repossess legally acquired property. More from Wendell Badri of HGP Nightly News.
The executive director of the Office of the Leader of the Opposition made these statements on Friday at a virtual press conference. He was responding to statements made by the current vice president and former president, S.G.U, who had said that lands at Ogle were given away by the former APNU AFC administration without following due process and below market value. The executive director said that the PPP cannot dispute the fact that a former PPP prime minister was able to purchase prime land with property for 84,000 Guyana dollars, while selling poor people house lots for $500,000 and more.
Let the PPP dispute the fact that the present illegitimate president bought Gaisuko's Lenora estate property way below its value. They cannot. It must therefore be clearly established that the PPP are hypocrites who are on an ethnic and political discriminatory witch hunt.
The executive director further stated that the properties that were sold while the APNU AFC coalition was in office were sold legally after proper evaluation. At Wales, for example, he said, the properties were in a deplorable state. They were sold to Gaisuko employees who were living in them or had 10 years of service.
They were sold at the current market value less 30%. Any government that cares for its people will support such an approach.
Norton noted that it is clear from its actions that the PPP believes that only them, their families, and friends must benefit from Guyana's patrimony and not African Guyanese and other ethnic groups who support the APNU AFC.
The APNU AFC coalition calls on those persons who have purchased or leased lands and other properties to not return them since they were obtained legally.
The APNU AFC coalition calls on the PPP regime to desist from dispossessing Guyanese of their legally acquired property and to recognize that they are setting a bad example. The PPP must recognize that all Guyanese have a right to share in our national patrimony and to note that the APNU AFC coalition will support the legal actions of those owners so that the courts can reaffirm their legal right to their property. The coalition also calls on those who obtain properties legally to not be intimidated by the PPP corrupt regime. Meanwhile, when questioned by the media as to what he would say to persons who have already returned lands to the state, Norton posited.
Once they still have the legal documents for the land, I believe they should keep the land. All of these lands were issued legally, and I believe what the PPP did was seek to intimidate people so that they will return the land. But I believe the return of the land is only possible if there is a legal agreement. They can't just say, you return the land.
Late October, it was revealed by the Attorney General, Anil Nandlal, that investigations have been launched into the sale of lands at Ogle by NISL S.G.U shortly before the March 2nd elections, and that several companies had not met the criteria but were still issued titles. Several companies have since returned the lands to the state, while the PPP government has promised to be lenient with those who continue to do so. Wendell Badri, Nightly News.
I am Eddie Frederick. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.